we'll get things started. Um, cool. Well, Lucas, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, for sure.
Our last Growth and Co talk of 2020. Thank God it's almost over. Um, but yeah, give us kind of your bio background, editing. Like, how'd you get into that? Kind of give us the full story.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, I have a pretty basic early, VHS deck to deck stuff. You know how that whole story goes. People, kind of get into it and run around their backyard with brothers and what have you. And so that was all true for me. Instead of like skate videos, I really got into wakeboarding videos because that was a big deal in Michigan. And so a bunch of my buddies ended up being like pro wakeboarders, and so I was never that good, but I like made a lot of their videos for them, sponsor videos, just session videos, all of that stuff. And so that's kind of how I got into it, from like more of a, I guess you could say, client aspect, um just working with them and sponsors and brands and whatnot. And so that kind of all took a back burner, and I ended up going to like 3 or 4 different colleges. It's a very winding story, we won't go there, but ended up graduating college just outside St. Louis here, with music business, which is completely irrelevant. And after I graduated, I just moved into town in St. Louis, being town, and just started freelancing everything from design to web development to just solo working with small businesses, video type stuff. With an affinity for editing, I'd always liked post. I had always hated, I should say, production, and I still do. I think it's terrible. It's like the hours are all over the place. Crafty is awful. It's just everywhere. And so I have never liked production, and so it was all about post for me. Production was something to suffer through, and so that was true. And I was freelancing in town, and so that's when I started to pick up some freelance post gigs here and there. And then a studio in town called Brute and Strobe. I started to talk with them and ended up getting an editor position there like 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And then from that point, I just started to build and grow the post there. The studio's been around for like 45 years. And traditionally they've done stills, a lot of alcohol, food, tabletop, pet, all of that. And then like 15 years ago, they started motion production. And then like 7 years ago, I came on as one of the editors. And then I started to build the post department, and started to get in a lot of external post work. It had only been stuff that the company had shot, we were posting. But as I started to kind of get in there and bring in some external work, that kind of grew and grew and grew. And so now, as of January, I'm a partner at the studio, and I'm running and managing the post production, which is cut, color, and audio, VFX, 3D, kind of the whole post, the whole post pipeline, if you will. And so that's kind of my thing.
Nice. Congrats on joining as a partner there. That's great.
Yeah, it's been January of 2020 is an interesting year to buy into a company, but it's been great. I mean, the foundation the studio has for 45 years is remarkable. And so they were just like, yeah, this financial downturn is crazy, but so was Black Monday of 1987. So was the dot-com burst. I was like, wow, all right, cool.
Yeah,
They're like, we're
right.
gonna get through it. It's like not a matter of if, it's how. And so that was really reassuring for me. I was like, all right, I made the right decision.
Totally. That's great. Talk about that then for a minute, because we've had this conversation on our Slack channels before of being a filmmaker, and whether an editor or cinematographer, but also being
Yeah.
in businesses, whether it's a production company. Like, I helped start this agency production company that I'm still a part of as well. And so talk about that, like just the business and the filmmaking craft, and how
Yeah.
that plays out for you, and just your decision making with that.
Yeah, I mean, I will be completely honest. I love the business aspect and sales and relationships and branding and all of that. I love that stuff a lot. And I think that's really important, especially if you're going to go into a business that's beyond just my name on the website. Like, just lucasjharger.com is very different from brutestrobe.com. You know what I mean? There's a whole different plethora of things you have to be concerned about, things you have to take into account as you're selling and rates and all, I mean, just everything. And so, for me, freelance was never the end goal. I never wanted to be freelance. I never liked it. I always needed that community. I think from a post aspect, it was really important for me, just because, post can be relatively isolating. And I don't think good cuts are ever made in a vacuum. And so, from my aspect, from where I was sitting, getting into a company and being surrounded by creatives and creators and people who had a unified vision in what they were trying to do and accomplish, and the type of work we wanted to get, and who we wanted to do the work with, and how we wanted to do the work. Getting in a community and being able to push that was really important. But I don't discount the fact that I really enjoy the business aspect. It's not something that is painful for me. I think a big part of that, the success of those two worlds coexisting, is your effectiveness at time management and being able to, like, you can't wait for creativity. You can't wait to be inspired, and you can't wait to do something. You have to turn it on in an instant. And that's a muscle that you work on and work on and work on. And so, for me, I spent a lot of time kind of exercising that muscle. And so it is, it's not always easy, but it's possible to drift between a sales call, which sales is a very loose term, a sales call, back to cutting, talk about, budgets with my post super, back to this, talk, you know what I mean? So you just kind of bounce back and forth, and you don't have to light incense, turn the lights down, and, get into the zone. You kind of have to be ready to go. And so, I think those two things, actually enjoying it and being very time sensitive to the process and what each universe takes from you.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Very cool. Sweet. Well, let's get into the fact that you obviously are like one of the people creating what we actually end up putting on our websites as cinematographers, right? And so I know we've all talked in plenty of ways throughout Slack and these other calls about shooting stuff we love and then seeing the post just go to shit.
Yeah.
And so maybe just talk from like your perspective as an editor, and we'll kind of get into like the editor DP production relationship as well. But like, just talk about like what, from maybe even a high level, like what makes a good edit for you, just in like some high level terms or feels, or what sets apart like a crappy or mediocre edit from something that really hits your wheelhouse or what you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think within within any conversation, and I can hear the post house's collective eye roll as I say this to them every single day. But you have to identify the reason that you're on the job, and you have to identify your function and your role in that job, because you can kind of get pulled down into the mire, into the muck of wanting to be artistically expressive with a milk commercial. I just really want this to be brooding and like emotive and really touch the soul of humanity. And I'm like, are we talking about the milk commercial? And they're like, yeah. Like, oh, okay, go on. I just really wanted to connect as who we are as humans. Like, are we talking about the milk commercial? And they're like, yeah. And it's like, but why are you on this job? And so if you identify early the reason that you're on the job, you can pull out successes for yourself along the way as a craftsperson, as an editor, as a DP, whatever. You identify the reason that you're on that job. Some jobs, they come, agency brings a gig to you, and they know it's not the greatest work in the world. It's not the greatest work in the world, but you're there to accomplish something for the brand. And so the agency is there to like drink good coffee in the morning, have some whiskey in the evening, and just have a good time. It doesn't need to be super stressful. Like, just make it seamless and make it a good workflow for them. And that's a success. You know what I mean? And then you move on. And then sometimes you get a project that is aesthetically, artistically exciting, fulfilling, energizing. And that's the one where you can kind of like stretch your legs and spread your wings and actually do the thing that you artistically that you love to do. And then, sometimes they just have you there to push buttons and just, here are storyboards. Here's this 30-second spot. Here's the storyboards within 5 frames. anybody can cut it. You know what I mean? And so then it's like, okay, so now what is your role and your function in that? Maybe it's just to have a really great workflow for them. So we're constantly, especially in the post world, because there's projects in it. It's kind of the same with the DP world for sure. I mean, directors are a little bit more precious with individual projects because they don't come along quite as often. But, you know, I mean, we have anywhere from 2 to 12 projects at any given day going through the post house. And if you sink your passion and emotion and all you are as a human into every single one of those projects, is severely exhausting. And so identifying the reason that you're on makes a success. So all of that aside, for me, like the thing that I really love and the thing that really gets me super excited is collaborating with the director or creative director or whomever it is early, and bringing a vision to life. I do at this point in my career and you know, state of self-actualization, I do really well within a sandbox, like a defined sandbox. And so once I know the boundaries of the sandbox, I can start to operate within that and help elevate ideas and work with people to accomplish something. And so for me, when I can have that conversation, that collaboration, that back and forth, and just taking something and elevating it and elevating it and trying to deliver something, to deliver on a vision, is the thing that really gets me excited. And then, you know, within that umbrella, you know, doc work is kind of where my heartbeat is. And so, and that kind of permeates in, you know, if you can cut a doc, you can cut a 30, but if you can cut a 30, you can't necessarily cut a doc. And so for me, a lot of the sensibilities flow from the doc world down into kind of all of the other aspects of the genres and stuff like that. But I'll always have a documentary on my hard drives. And so that's my passion.
Yeah, love that. Very cool. Talk about, okay, so group of emerging cinematographers here, both in like our actual community, but also on Instagram when we post this and chat with them too. So talk about what DPs can learn by, and you know, I think even for me and like some of my friends, the other mentors, we've kind of talked about this in different ways of how much we are or are not involved in post, especially when it's in like commercial world where it's quick turn on to the next job. Like talk about what DPs, cinematographers can learn from engaging in the post process, from talking with people like yourself, and even studying and seeing the feedback from someone like you who's seen literally everything they shot. And yeah, the feedback and learning that can happen there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it really, you know, not to, I mean, editing is awesome. Like that's where it all comes together, right? And I mean, so there's a million ways that you can learn, and there's a million ways you can learn anything. One of the ways that I've learned and am learning and always learn is by reading the real old directors' memoirs, papers, whatever. And so I'll just start throwing stuff out, but I'm not as pretentious as this may sound. But I mean, even Tarkovsky says, you know, production is merely just the means to gather the assets, and then it's all about post. And he's the big visual guy, you know. He's the one it's all about the shot. It's all about the shot. And he even says in a lot of his papers and a lot of his essays. But with all that said, it comes together. And so when you see all of these shots in relationship to each other, I think that's when you learn the most. And that's when I learned the most as an editor, is when you can see these disparate pieces, you know, kind of coming together. Bresson said all the time that cinema is the relationship between images and not images of themselves. And so it's only when you start to put them together that you start to see them in the context and in the whole. And then he went on to say that he's never looking for beautiful images. And if you see any Bresson, it's like, are you kidding me? But he said, I'm never looking for beautiful images, just necessary images. Mm-hmm. And so it's the necessary images, the necessary building blocks to put together a story and to put together a narrative that then creates something much bigger and larger in and of itself. And so then you have these two dudes, Bresson and Tarkovsky, who are huge image people. And then, but they're saying it's all about the relationship and the juxtaposition between the shots. But then you have Tarkovsky that kind of takes like the left turn in that conversation. Sorry, I'm starting to. So then you have Tarkovsky that takes the left turn in this conversation. And he says, however, so he says, yes, I understand him and Eisenstein, who's the old editor, who kind of like is the godfather of editing, really butt heads, even though they were alive at very different times. But he says, okay, I understand that editing is the end all be all for like, this is where the film comes together. Before this, it's not a film. But then, and so it's within rhythm and it's within pace. That is what makes a film. That's what takes it out of photography and into cinematography. That's what takes it out of, Byzantine, So then we all of a sudden have these juxtapositions and these rhythms. And then Tarkovsky is like, so Bresson says it's the rhythm between two shots, but then Tarkovsky says, no, it's the rhythm within the shot. And so he holds that you have two images and you have to put them together, but then it's also what's happening in between each images. And you can see in his films, it's much more flowy, whereas Bresson's like, ba, 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 you know what I mean? It's a little bit more dry, whereas Tarkovsky is very floaty and kind of flowing around. And so then you have kind of the same approach, or you have two different approaches to the same end, which is rhythm and pace. And so all of that to say, film is rhythm and tone. That's what these two people say. Film is rhythm and tone. And how rhythm and tone is achieved can be from individual celluloids, individual shots that are smashed together, or it can be the rhythm within them. And so all of that to say, from a cinematography standpoint, looking at process, for me, I think it's much more about the juxtaposition and the relationship between images in a consecutive order that is meaningful. Individual frames and individual stills are great for posts, but they don't make films. Bresson said painters are not defined by the colors that they choose, but how they use them in juxtaposition to each other. And so it's the combination, and it's like the bringing together, and it's the fulfillment of what makes a film or a spot or something else. And so then all of that comes back to, yeah, but we're making a milk commercial. Fine. So now we can see how these things actually correlate to one another. Within the context of a milk commercial, it can still float and feel right, and then you can take what you will from that into your next project. But for me, it's all about rhythm, tone, and pace, and that is from shot to shot. But as Tarkovsky says, it's also within the shot.
Damn, dropping wisdom right here. Okay, so talk about as the cinematographer and like thinking about even jobs that we as mentors still shoot that are like passion projects, smaller crew, like we don't have a first AD or scripty or like everyone there. Talk about, and especially with certain directors and how much they're thinking about the edit or how little they're thinking about the edit. Like talk about the role of a cinematographer to at least be aware of obviously how things cut together, but also the rhythm, the pacing of it. Like give us, if you are coming on set and dreading, especially the COVID, crafty is like non-existent now.
Right.
Like what is your advice? Obviously, like we're lighting stuff, we're composing stuff, but then we're also what did I shoot? What will I shoot? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in the edit, no offense, but I yell at DPs a lot when I'm cutting.
What do you got? What are your main?
I'm just like, but it's there. The action is there. Why are you over here? Something is happening. This is more so in doc than commercial or scripted or something like that. And so for me, I'm just like, what are you doing? But it's all in good. Surely. So the things that I really appreciate and the things that I think give the most flexibility to, I don't know. I know people. I can hear some people. I hear very distinct voices being like, "Shut up." But having the flexibility in the edit is very important. Obviously, for specific projects, for specific genres, all of that stuff. Sure. So I'm speaking to a particular project, but for me, I like connected movements, right? And so if it's hands and then head, like face, two shots, can we also get it into one? That gives us exponentially more options, opportunity. We can work with pace, we can work with flow. If you only shoot it as one, that the rhythm of the shot is instinct, and it's built in and it's baked in there, which may be purposeful, meaningful, and appropriate. But if we're not 100% sure of the pace and the rhythm, like if you do it as a single and then you can do it as two different ones, that gives post and editorial much more flexibility and ability to kind of ebb and flow and to find the rhythm within the edit, which happens more often than not, is we're finding the rhythm and the tone and the pace within the edit. And so for me, I'm always kind of asking just for like, cool, you got this one and just get one real quick, just
Yeah.
just just to give us some flexibility in the edit. And then beyond that, it's like um wides, and I know those are difficult, but any kind of establishing, any kind of give us the lay of the land and where these people are. I mean, so many times we're trying to solve um physical relationship between people in the edit. It's like we only have these tight shots and we have to make them, and you just, you know, with people, with kids as savvy as they are today with the YouTubes, it's like you can't really pull one over on them. You have to establish, and it's always been true, but you have to establish, the setting where we are, where these two individuals, three individuals, this object and this object, where they are in relationship to each other. And so I'm always looking for those wides, those establishings, stuff like, and that's the stuff that I'm always asking for as well. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think those are a couple of things. Why is establishing, and then giving options, connected movements, and then in independent movements.
It's good. It's really good. Yeah, I remember watching A Quiet Place, which maybe it was just the first time I saw it. But if you've seen it, like there's the basement where they're living most of the time. I got to the
Yeah,
end of the movie and like halfway through, I just felt annoyed because I was like, where, like, I can't see anything in here and I don't know the space. And they shot it from like two opposite angles, like both directions, but they never showed me how they showed like kind of the steps, but not a wide.
yeah,
And I just got to the end of it and I was like, and then there were kind of two houses that they would go in and out of. And I never knew which house was that or which upstairs led to there. And it was just like a very spatially confusing movie for me.
yeah,
I've never really thought about, I mean, I think I was probably reading something around that time of, showing, establishing, creating like, so some like coherence for the audience.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it's especially important in suspense and action, just because you have to know point A to point B.
yeah,
And if you don't know point A to point B, you're not going to be able to really glean and milk that suspense or that action or anything like that. And so, your genre also is really, really important for that. Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, cool. So let's go to pre-pro. So you talked about like working with directors, creative directors, showrunners, whoever's kind of like leading the project. Talk about like your ideal, and I mean, if and when like DPs are part of those conversations as well, as you're even like seeing shot lists come out or storyboards. Talk about like your ideal workflow and what those early conversations, when you have them. I'm guessing you don't have them every single time, but when you do, especially in like doc world, if that's
Yeah.
kind of specialty, like what does that look like? What do you hope for? What helps the project go better than not having that time?
Right. Yeah. I mean, documentary, I get pulled in really early, often before principal, weeks, months before, a year before, whatever. Like I get pulled in very, very early in a lot of doc work. The latest I tend to get pulled into doc is like for 30 to 40% through the first batch of shooting, if you will.
Okay.
I mean, doc kind of is always ongoing, and so it's kind of hard to say what is principal and what isn't. But so I get pulled in really early on doc work. And that has more to do with like story structure, characters, all of that. We're not often talking about shots or shot lists. So that kind of aside, in the commercial world and or narrative pending the scale and scope, um, I tend to get pulled in when there are storyboards, and just to cut an automatic, take the storyboards and put together the 30-second, and start the music exploration, start just overfilling it with sound effects. That's something that I always make sure to do with storyboards, is to just put in a ton of sound effects, because it's one thing to show a storyboard of like this person walks from here to here, but to actually put in the footsteps, you're like, oh shit, that's going to take like 20 seconds, we need to rethink this. And so like the putting in sound effects can actually help the pace of a storyboard, so you can actually start to feel it, so you don't end up with 75 shots for a 30-second commercial. And so that tends to be when I get pulled in, when there are storyboards. The director, DP, creative director, whomever, have already kind of started to work together. If the DP happens to be involved in the storyboard process, um, that's when I get pulled in to just cut together animatics and cut together those aspects and then kick it over. And then I honestly don't really have conversation until the footage hits my desk. And so, um, I see a lot of treatments, and I just kind of send back an email that's like, cool, it'd be neat if we did this, and then be like, yep, send me the footage. That's for a lot of the commercial work. I think for, more of those passion projects, personal projects, film, it tends to be a little bit more involved, and I have a little bit more conversation with DPs, but the majority of my conversation with the DP is through the footage and through seeing the result of the work as it stands in the shots. And so that's kind of where that lands. And then color, because we have in the post house we have colorists, and so the DPs kind of circle back around for color, and we try to be really accommodating to them in that process. Sometimes the workflow is just too fast, and it's just like we don't have time to do a pass with you, basically. But sometimes there is that time and that opportunity. And so what we do is we use this thing called Stream Deck, which is dope. And so we have a bunch of color calibrated iPads that we send around, and so then they can get on and just pipe into the live stream of the color sesh and just kind of stream what's going on and have a conversation. If they're not intimately involved in giving direction, they can at least keep an eye on what's going on and sidebar and be like, it was supposed to be black and white. It's like, all right, well, it's not black and white anymore. So so that's kind of the extent of the conversation. I'll be honest, I don't tend to have a ton of conversations with DPs in the pre-pro process. It's usually directors, creative directors, people like that.
Awesome. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about in post. So like director cuts, what I'm guessing like potentially you end up showing on your website, like lucasharger.com, and maybe with that, knowing that like a lot of the DPs who are a part of this are potentially still cutting some of their own stuff or working on passion projects where, they're taking the footage, like just kind of give some advice and thoughts around that, whether it is a director's cut for a true spot or if they're still editing some of their own stuff.
Like some advice in what capacity?
I mean, part of it beyond even director's cuts or like them editing their own stuff is editing reels. Which we've had various conversations about, but like, especially when they're first starting out and don't have, 6, 8, 10 spots that they want to show on their website of having a reel.
Right.
So maybe let's start with reels. Kind of like advice, critiques of reels you've seen.
I mean, and I'm a little tainted. So reels, under 60 seconds. Let's go. Let's just like get going here. 90 if you're Deacons, maybe. I don't know. I'm just like, let's move it along. So for me, it tends, and this is, we'll have a generic editor's reel, and then we'll get people to ask for your red car at night on Kirby Road reel. And so then you cut that. And so the kind of that penultimate, that overview reel, for me is I try to get as diverse as possible, and I like when I see diverse, and I don't have to necessarily think or be fooled that every single shot is from a national broadcast Super Bowl commercial. You know what I mean? That's not the point. That's not necessarily, for me, the point of the reel. Now, I'm not hiring DPs, and so maybe it is the point for those people, but for me, it's the diversity. It's the ability to hit these different tones and vibes and genres, if you will, and then to have an understanding of the whole post process. There could be the most visually stunning reel without sound design, and there could be a mediocre reel with sound design, and I will go to the mediocre reel with sound design nine times out of 10. Again, Brisson, my boy, he says, when you've won the ear, you don't even have to use the eye. So it's like sound is more important than visuals all the time. And so if you can get away with communicating something with a sound, then don't use the visual. And so for me, the sound is, sound is 100% of film. And so it's like being able to kind of build in, because you can create a much more pristine experience. And so I really appreciate sound with reels. And it doesn't have to be like whiz bang pow sound design transformer clicks. It can be just ambience,
Mm.
like if it's a night scene, like crickets, like YouTube crickets, and then you just download the crickets and just put it on there, and it is way better. And so I always do, I always like sound, really leaning into sound, because it expands the image considerably. And so, I think those things for me, because you're constantly, trying to, make people feel like they're in the moment, and to make them feel like they're in the reality. Uh, Brisson, we should have a drinking game. Brisson is like, your film should be that of being in a town, in a room, or in a forest. It should not be a photograph of a room, a photograph of a forest, or a photograph, of a town. And so it should be the experience of being in it. And part of that is sound. And so that expands the image, in my opinion. Anyway, so reels for me, sub 90 with sound, and then as much diversity as you possibly can. And honestly, we're doing cuts. I'm doing cuts all the time. All the cutters at the studio are doing cuts all the time to expand their vocabulary of their craft, sure, but also to get those shots for the reel. You know what I mean? And so if there is a great sunset, and a great place in your town and you can grab somebody and go do a cool shot, like, why not? And then if somebody's like, what's that from? It's like, my camera. Like, what else needs to be said? And so if it's a good shot, it's a good shot. It doesn't matter if it was for a Coke commercial or for your local brewery. And so I think there's so much opportunity to kind of stuff the reel with really interesting and engaging shots. And then as your career starts to move and your career starts to build, you just start swapping out those shots with client work, and in 2 years it's all client work, and then you're like, damn, it's all client work. And then you start swapping out client work with other shots that, so it's kind of this pendulum. But that's kind of my approach to
That's awesome.
the
Yeah.
real stuff.
Good. Let me look at a few of these other questions we had here from people. Yeah, we kind of already hit your advice for DPs on set. Any other pet peeves for DPs, or like what you see in post of what I don't know, I think it was you of talking about doc work of just let it roll for like 15 seconds longer.
Yeah.
Like what you do. Maybe let's talk about docs. Like,
Yeah.
doc world, advice for DPs on docs that you're
Yeah. Yeah. Just let it roll. That's insane. The amount of gold that is just about to happen, and it's cut. And it's like, we're not on film. We have infinite space, like literally infinite space. Like, you just buy another $30 hard drive. So just letting it roll just for a little bit longer. That's something. Another thing, especially with doc, is that, and I understand the impetus, but it's always shooting where the action is. It's always shooting the person talking. In like a Verde scene, it's always shooting person talking, when the interesting thing is in the reaction of the other person. And so you can get the person talking and you can cover off on that. It's a lot easier when you have a couple cameras, but even if you don't, like, let's do a pass of that conversation where you're just getting listening. You know what I mean? Because you can fake a lot of micro expressions too in the edit. And so, not everything has to be, we're making movies, not journalism. And so not everything has to be in the moment, in 100%. This is exactly what happened in this moment in time. So for me, it's like, like, get the action, especially if the action is interesting, but then let's get the reaction to the action and get the other aspect of that, whether it's a conversation, whether it's somebody watching something, let's just say some athletic event or something where there's something happening. We get enough of a basketball game. Good Lord. Now let's start shooting and turning the camera on the people that are watching and getting some reactions and responses, and you might miss some big plays and some big moments, but like, I don't know. We're not there to watch basketball. You know what I mean? Like we can turn on our TV to do that. We're there to watch human experience and like watch people experience something and like go through that experience with them. And so for, you know, for me, it's the action is great, but the reaction is better.
It's awesome. It's really good. Talk about how you approach, you get a hard drive, you know, it's on your desk, you're about to start cutting it. And there's like little to no structure. They shot a bunch of stuff, they documented a bunch of stuff, and now it's your job to, you know, create out of many pieces.
Yeah, that's the shit. So you know, the approach to each film, I mean, I have my foundational and baseline approach, but then I have to be willing and open to going wherever the individual projects wants to take me from a workflow perspective. I always have told all the other editors, if you're doing more work to retain your workflow, you need a new workflow. It's supposed to be there to serve you. You're not supposed to serve it. And so I use like a big chalkboard and I do a bunch of stuff on the chalkboard and people are like, what are you doing on a chalkboard? And I'm like, I don't know, but it's like helpful until it's not helpful. And so once something isn't helpful, stop doing that and then do something else. And so having kind of a tool bag of workflow approaches is really important. And so for me, so foundationally, footage is on my desk, I ingest it and I just lay everything out on a timeline. And so if it's days, I'll lay out day 1, day 2, day 3, and I have these sequences with 10 hours of footage from day 1, 10 hours from day 2, whatever, days. And then I just start watching it. I mean, if there's audio to sync, external audio and stuff like that, all of that stuff. But then I just start watching it and I watch everything and just watch. And then as I'm watching, I'll start bucketing. And I do that based on themes. Morning coffee goes into its own sequence. I'm a big sequence editor. I don't do bins, as it's all sequence and laying out on timeline because I like to see everything. And so, going through and morning coffee there, and then morning drive there, and then morning drive female here, morning drive male here. You just start separating all of this stuff out. And sometimes I'll put modifiers in the beginning of the sequence, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And so I can be it's still chronological, within my main bin, but it's all kind of broken out. And so, just start to go through and just organize everything because, editing is the process of reducing. And so it may not feel like you're editing, but if you're reducing, you're editing. And so it's just constantly carving stuff away. It's like Michelangelo discovering the sculpture of David rather than creating the sculpture of David. And so, especially in documentary work, it's very reductive. It's a very reductive process. And so for me, it's like, I don't have to start a timeline and actually start putting pieces next to each other to start making something. I know that tends to be what people want to jump into as soon as humanly possible, but it's just reducing. Anything that is not additive is subtractive, and so it's just taking stuff away, and then you're just kind of left with all of these sequences of these different themes, and then it's just like, what should we do now? I don't know. How about selects? So then you just start going through and pulling selects. And for me, I elevate selects on a reel and I never delete the in-betweens. Oh, this pisses DPs off. Okay. So there is no such thing as a good shot or a bad shot, just an appropriate shot. That is a repackaging of the Bresson quote from earlier. So there's not beautiful. I don't want beauty. I want necessary. And so for me, there is no good shot or bad shot, just appropriate. And so how could I possibly know from when I'm at this part of the process? I'm not even cutting. I'm not even to the filmmaking, actual putting together of this thing. How could I possibly know what a select is? It's impossible. There's a preconceived notion of what a good shot is when you're that early in the process. And so for me, I elevate and I never get rid of anything outside. If the camera, say like they're, stopping recording, the camera dips, like you can use that, I mean, that in an appropriate environment, in an appropriate moment, that's a great shot. People are like, how did you get that shot? You're like, I don't know. And so, it's, you keep everything there, you keep everything in front of you, and I elevate all of my selects, but I still have everything else. Because as soon as you start deleting your non-selects or what you think aren't your selects, then you tend to not be as smart as you think you are. And so if you delete all of the things that you don't think are good, out of sight, out of mind. You're never going to go back to that stuff.
Mm.
And so I start just pulling selects. And then after I've done that, I watch the footage 2 or 3 times at that point, and then I can actually start putting together stuff in relation to each other. And a lot of times I'll just have some ideas and be like, oh, this shot and this shot would be awesome next to each other. And so I'll just create a sequence that just is like ideas, and just start like, oh, these 2 shots are cool. Oh, these 2 shots are cool. And just start doing that. I don't have any intent to use that. It was just fun in the moment. I did it, and I went back to organizing. And just kind of go through that, and you get through it. You have your selects, you have everything organized, you watch everything twice, and then the gods will tell you what to do next.
I love it. That's awesome. Just looking at the chat here. Oh, Rafi is saying, can you start a Growth and Co for editors so we can have more editors to work with? So.
We'll see.
If you do, I mean, it isn't a bad idea in terms of just even like younger editors, that we can maybe like connect and pair.
Yeah, that'd be sick. No, that'd be super interesting, because I mean, I think part of the process at any stage of a career or of development, but especially early on, is just getting the experience and the opportunity to work with other collaborators and to work with other disciplines. That's really important.
Yeah.
And that's something that I did early on, is just like reach out to directors and just be like, I'll cut something for, it's a lot easier for an editor, because I could say this, I'll cut this. Can I cut this for you for free? And if you hate it, you can delete it. And then you can go on your merry way and do something else. For DP, that,
Sure.
set is a finite amount of time, and you can't easily swap a DP on the second day. So, that's a little bit more of a challenge from a DP standpoint, but just having that ability, or not ability, but having that aptitude and desire to like just find other people. That's the other thing, is trying to find individuals, creatives that are around your same level.
Yeah.
To work with is really important. You can reach out, I could reach out to whomever, but if I'm not ready for that, and I'm not honest with myself, and I'm like, why didn't they get back to me? It's like, because you're still an iMovie, I don't know. You have like, being able to grow with people is extremely important from a collaborator standpoint. It's not just about this goal, this penultimate, this is where I want to be and everything's going to be great. You're in a constant trajectory and a constant progression. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's important.
We've talked about growing with directors.
Yeah.
You're not going to necessarily like be able to reach out to that director who's, shooting national campaigns if you're still doing local, whatever. And so I think the same thing with editors, I mean, and colorist. And so, I mean, I think if you do have the list, and we could offline later, of younger editors, because we have some killer DPs who their imagery is incredible, but like they're never, either they're cutting it and it's not getting to the place they want, or it's going off somewhere else and never getting anywhere too. So
Right.
With a young editor with great style, and then both like footage I love and an editor I love, could be some fun new work.
That could be super interesting. I love that idea. Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. Any other questions from the crew that's on here right now? I know we're a little smaller, kind of like in between Christmas and stuff, but any other?
Rafi had another one on Slack, Carson, about Lucas, what was a frustrating we'll fix it in post moment you've had? And was there an exciting we'll fix it in post moment?
We'll fix it in post. If they only knew. I mean, by we mean like checkbooks and bank accounts fix things in post. We don't fix things in post. Let's see. We'll start with the exciting thing. I mean, for me, if it's exciting, it's probably not fixing. If it's exciting, it's probably elevating. And if we have the opportunity, and and by opportunity, I tend to mean time, to lean into shots. And I really do like to add the extra spice that takes a shot into the how did they get this shot realm, whether it's with a sky replace, not necessarily a full-fledged sky replace, but maybe just a sky addition of some clouds. If it's, you know, one thing we did recently, it was just like, I mean, we could put a 3D deer in the back and that'd be pretty sick. It doesn't need to be like the focal point, but it'd be like, holy shit, they got this shot and there's a deer in the back. How did they do that? Did they hire that deer? You know, and it's just like, let's put a deer back there, you know? And it's just like, we have the time to do that. Let's do it. And in this shot, it's like, I mean, I feel like there should be fireflies. There should be fireflies. Let's do fireflies. You know, it's just like simple things like that, just to add and to elevate a shot. That tends to be in most relationship and conversation with you know, with director or creative director or whomever. But that's the stuff that I get really excited about, is just if we have the time to really invest into elevating shots to the realm of remarkable, you know, that's really fun and exciting. I mean, a lot of the fix it and post stuff generally happens with logo removals, and it's just like, you could have put a piece of tape over that, you know, that piece of tape cost you 20 cents. Now it's going to cost you 5K. Like, but you know, you did it. So it's like stuff like that. There's a lot of logo removals that they tend to fix in post, screen replacements, but that's not really a fix. That's kind of necessary evil of the times we live in. A lot of screen replacements and stuff like that. You know, I think a frustrating one has been 2020. With all of the user generated content edits, and it's like, there is no fixing that in post. It's like, hey, we really don't like the background that this guy shot himself on. Is there any way we can swap that? I'm like, no, there isn't a way you can swap that. I'll tell you one thing. Okay, this is for a major brand. This is just a fun story. This never happens. They're a big brand, and we were cutting this spot, and it was a 60 national broadcast 60. There's a massive conversation about the hero. This guy, he's like, all right, 30s, you know, young professional. What would he wear? Definitely like a, you know, a long sleeve button up, but he has got a couple that rolled up because he's hip, and, you know, stuff like that, right? And so it was like weeks of pre-pro to find this guy who was going to star in this commercial. And so they shoot it, and then we cut it. The cut is almost approved. Like, we're supposed to get approval. It's like 3 p.m. We're getting approval at 5. We go into color and audio tomorrow morning. We deliver at 3 p.m. the next day. It's on air nationally the following day, whatever. Okay. So 3 p.m. this note comes in. That's just like, we've decided that we would rather that hero have a short sleeve t-shirt and a sleeve of tattoos. Is there any way we can fix that and add that? And I was like, oh, I was like, are you serious? And it was absurd. It was like, no. Are we locked? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. So that wasn't frustrating as much. It was just hilarious. But I think,
Did they lock
you know,
it? Did they reshoot or can the project?
They locked it. We colored, we audio, we delivered, and then they canned it. Not because of the sleeve guy, just because of the brand was like, we don't. That's the one thing that a lot of like really, really large companies, especially Super Bowl spots, the amount of Super Bowl spots, you know, they'll do, so these big brands will do like 4-5 spots, and then on the day of, they'll pick the one that they're going to go with and just can the other ones, because the ad buy is considerably more expensive than the production. And so and they got to get the ad buy right, and so they'll do, you know, user testing the morning of Super Bowl to see which one's going to vibe at 3 p.m., you know. And so these places, I mean, that's the other thing, is don't get attached to these big brands and like large campaigns and stuff, because that stuff is like vapor in the wind. It just like poof, it's gone. And it's, as long as the check clears, you should be happy.
It's good. Matt was asking on here too, shooting for the edit. Yeah, we kind of touched on a little bit of this too. Yeah, maybe any other thoughts though of like shooting for the edit, thinking about pacing as you're either like in pre-production or on set, talking
Yeah.
about how you're about to take?
Yeah. Just it's actually kind of another thing would be similar to the doc conversation we were having, is getting those reaction shots, even if they're not necessarily boarded. Just doing a real quick dry path where we don't even have to have the actors saying the lines. We can just have them giving quick looks, and it's going to take 45, 30, 45 seconds, a minute to just get some reactions, get some like hands in pockets, get some coverage of these people doing things. Because the amount of especially in a little bit more fast paced commercial environment and narrative, but commercial environment, there's an opportunity, and there's the to just pick up some really quick stuff, some really quick inserts, because there's lines that get stitched under and thrown under so much stuff. It's insane. And even like over the shoulder stuff, just throwing lines in there. I mean, if you watch any film, just watch the person that it's not focused on, and like it is never what they're saying.
Yeah.
Which is totally fine. I mean, it's I was aware from the beginning that Tenet wasn't real. So it's fine. It's still the experience of the film. And so getting the opportunity to be able to stuff lines is nice, especially if it's a very dialogue heavy thing, whether that's backs of heads, sides, people listening, so you can still have the lines going and you're looking at the person reacting, hands and other places than by the face, stuff like that. Like those really kind of quick inserty type things are really helpful. Yeah, all of that is helpful for pace. The more the merrier from a footage standpoint. Obviously there's some scenes that are extremely intentional. You're not going to shoot a bunch of inserts for Birdman, but it's getting that coverage and getting those safeties is super, super helpful. And some of those wides can also count as your safeties because you can't see them talking. You're so wide. So not only is it your establishing shot, but it can also double as like, I don't know what to cut to, and we got to get this line, and let's just go wide again.
Yeah, it's good. All right, if there's nothing else in the chat, my last question would be like, what have you watched recently that you liked, didn't like, stood out to you? Like, give us kind of your latest like consumption of TV or film and thoughts on it.
Soul was really good.
Soul was so
Soul
good.
was great. Yeah, I've been looking forward to that one for a very long time. So that was a great movie. I love the movies that are about something so much more than what they're about, and that one was definitely about something a lot more than it was about, which was, I mean, Pixar tends to do that in general, but that was really great. Let's see, man. I mean, there's so much great stuff. I mean, this is like the golden era of doc. It's a very exciting time. Don't Fuck with Cats was chilling.
Yeah.
And that was just a really good for all of you that if that's something that's interesting, the doc world, having a very concise, in theory, a concise story is, not to spoil anything, but things happen in a consecutive order. And there's not a lot of coverage from a footage standpoint other than news. Okay. And so then you have interviews, that's your other texture. And then you have what? I don't know. And so then that's where this really, really, really like was a shining star for me, is just the ability to get these like brooding, tense imagery of just a dude standing in front of a window. And it just works so well. And then there was a bunch of the UI stuff with the quick typing and the da 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 and all of that stuff. All those little textures worked really, really well. And so, there are a lot of, short docs and feature docs and series and stuff like that, where it is going to be an exercise in minimalism as far as how much footage you have the ability to acquire and to capture. So then it's like, what else can we shoot? And especially in the doc world, I'm always talking about textures, like what's the texture? And I like to have a diversity of textures. And so, there's always an opportunity to get more textures, and they can be interesting or completely different. Another one would be Wormwood. That one changed my life. That had really, really great textures. And the way that they incorporated and used like the lower thirds, you know, the titles, the graphics, all of that newspaper stuff, and then it like built up, and then at, you know, like by the third or fourth episode, all of the montage stuff that you saw in episode 1 and 2 that just looked cool was very intentional. That was crazy.
Yeah.
And then like the clock was I mean, it was just so much attention to detail. But that's Errol Morris for you. He's a god among mere mortals. So I think like those things are probably, you know, some of the things. I mean, The Last Dance obviously was remarkable. The playing around with timelines was crazy. Just the ability to hold, you know, that interview shot of Michael Jordan was terrible. But other than that, I was like, yo, this is like Michael Jordan's tell all, and this looks awful.
Yeah.
But
Well,
just the
didn't-
bouncing around in timelines was amazing.
awesome.
So yeah.
Very cool. Lucas, thanks so much for hanging with us. I know you got the little baby, so you're probably not sleeping much these days, but we
No,
will.
it's good. It was fun, and like, yeah, this is an awesome platform and opportunity, and yeah, we should offline about some other potentials and stuff. That'd be sweet.
Definitely do that. Awesome.